Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to our second episode of Healers of the World. Just a really quick recap to ground in the intention of these conversations. I am on a mission to find and share stories of true healers of the world with you, my listeners. Let this be a space where we bring reverence and respect back to the titles and the lineages and the paths walked by those who call themselves healers. I'm so fascinated by how diverse the path of a healer looks, from how the calling to serve shows up in big and small ways for these individuals. How did the veil open up for them? And who is supporting them to bring this healing in? I want to gather gnosis as we lean into the diverse perspectives of these humans and hear how they understand and perceive the times that we find ourselves in. So without taking up any more space today, I am absolutely thrilled to introduce you all to Katharine Hargreaves. Kat is a shamanic practitioner, initiated medicine woman in the lineages of the Dagara people of West Africa, a psychedelic facilitator, a teacher, a ceremonial guide, and in the words of Kat, in some of her bios that I have found on the internet, she is also a transcendent beast. And I wanted to include that today because let me tell you that Kat has a basket full of medicine. But what has most attracted me to this beautiful human is her raw and untamed authenticity. And as my clients hear me say so often, our quest for spirituality is truly just a quest for authenticity. The sole mission that each of us here on this planet are on is the mission to uncover who we really are, to open up that delightful and divine Pandora's box of that true soul expression. And when we do that, our life's purpose reveals itself to us as we do. And I find that Kat's aura just gives permission to those around her to be more real. So let me tell you, sister, welcome and hello. Let me tell you, as someone who prizes authenticity, I am taking notes.
Much, Robyn. It is wonderful to be here.
I have been so looking forward to this conversation. I've sat with you and with your stick and experienced the magic and the medicine of the Dagara divination. And what blew me away from this beautiful channel that you occupy when you offer this medicine is also the richness of the ritual that comes through, a tradition that speaks to medicine in ritual. This is something that has really captivated me and I find so powerful. I am also so intrigued by the depth of the mysticism and magic that lies in the African traditions. And so it's been such a gift to come into contact with you, Kat. But of course, that isn't the only way that I have experienced your medicine. I'm sitting in a writing group with you at the moment, learning the alchemy of writing. And I've also attended one of your classes on hygienic, psychedelic leadership. That wasn't exactly what you called it, but it was about bringing integrity to the space. So welcome again. Thrilled to have you here. I selfishly am doing these podcasts for myself more than anyone else because it is just so thrilling to be able to sit in conversation like this. So let's jump in from the beginning. I would love to open the floor to you, Kat, and just find out, like, how did it all start? How did your medicine find you? What does it taste like? And how do you recap your becoming story?
What a juicy question. I have been asked, I've told my story so many times, and it's something that I really am excited to share today. And it was inspired by the last, your first podcast episode. I believe that Vanessa was speaking about self-initiation. And as someone who was born and raised in the West, in America, We live in what my teacher would call one of the most spiritually impoverished countries. And
Mm.
I see that all around, right? We have this melting pot, which is such a blessing in disguise. But we also have what I would call a lot of lost lineages, a lot of fragmented ancestral
Mm.
lines, because we are a country of immigrants and colonizers and former enslaved people, right? People who came from so many different walks and paths of life. And so, as someone who was raised within that cultural framework, I see this a lot where I went through very early on at the age of 14, I had what was called a shamanic death. So I went through a year of extreme loss, abandonment, betrayal, just a lot of really intense relational experiences that culminated in this near death experience on the way to my grandfather's funeral in the car with my father. And how symbolic, right? Because like the grandfather, the father, the masculine is what we need, the rootedness, the anchoring force to understand ourselves and to come
Mm.
fully out into the world. And my there's been a lot of addiction in my family. There's been a lot of stories of spiritual loss. And I really believe that addiction emerges from that, right? This sense of
Mm.
like deep spiritual crisis and pain. And I am a product of many of these stories, right? I carry many of these stories. And from a very young age, I could feel these stories in other people. And I didn't know how to make sense of them. I could just feel these like, oof, there's some really, right? So I share all that because it is a significant part of my own origin story of often going through deep shamanic self initiations without any guidance, without any
Mm.
mentorship or eldership, without really any framework to fully understand what was happening. And, just essentially being engulfed in the
Mm.
underworld and needing to then find my way out.
Mm.
And that is such that is such a powerful experience, and also one that is incredibly isolating and alienating.
Mm.
And so, I walked for a really long time just following breadcrumbs that life gave me
Mm.
and having many different forms of these death and rebirth experiences, these
Mm.
threshold experiences. And I started to put the pieces together that maybe there's something here for me, right? Like maybe there's
Mm.
um, something that I can piece together. And it really started to coalesce, I would say in early 2019. I had had some significant awakenings and experiences through psychedelics and plant medicine. I had been dabbling in, alchemy and the hermetic principles. I've always been very mystically driven. I've always
Mm.
resonated with the truth of the ancient mysteries and the cultures and lineages and
Mm.
people that carry these.
Mm.
Um, but it wasn't until 2019 when I was on a spiritual pilgrimage of my own, just seeking belonging, seeking to find my people, my community,
Mm.
to learn more about my medicine and right? Like, what is the form that this really wants to take?
Mm.
Because it had always felt very scattered. Like, I try this and then I do that. And it was around that time that I met a partner who would really be a door opener for me, and
Mm.
through whom I directly connected with my teacher, Mark, and the Dagara medicine. And one thing I love about this medicine is its embodiment, because, I had, you can feel and understand theoretically wisdom, but until you live that, until it becomes embedded in you, until it is transforming you, you can't fully understand or transmit the power of that experience. And so when I connected with stick divination, which is one of the many forms of divination in the African diaspora, in the many cultures, when I encountered this medicine, I will never forget, because there have been many moments in nature where I had, been out communing and I had found a stick and it had told me things. And I just thought it was me being on mushrooms or me being weird or what have you. And then I sit down in front of this diviner for the very first time, no context. And he picks up a stick that starts telling him things about me that blew my mind. And this just electric bolt of lightning went through my whole system. This recognition and a feeling of, I know this. And so, he explained some things to me, and then rituals were gifted from the ancestors and from the spirits. And it was these rituals that what they did for me was so astonishing. It took all of these floating nebulous parts and pieces of my reality and felt like my spirit, right? This ungroundedness. And it anchored them in the earth. And in the year that I just worked with this medicine as, someone who was seeking it, someone who needed healing, well before I came into the lineage, I saw my whole life do a 180. Everything, I can't say everything came together, but things coalesced in a way that I had just never felt before. And all of a sudden, there was a path. And I've been walking that path ever since. And from there, it's taken me into other corners of my medicine and shown me how they interconnect. But without that ground, and I really feel this medicine, when I think about one of, the meta reasons why a traditional indigenous African medicine has found its way to the West and found its way into my life, it's because it carries codes and knowledge and wisdom and a way of being that we have lost in the West. I don't know if we ever had. And it is this that brought me home.
There are so many facets of your story that I deeply relate to. As someone who is self-initiated, it feels like that, like our medicine feels scattered, and we've got to pick up the different pieces from the different traditions, or that's how it's often felt to me. And I marvel at the level of surrender because, 10 years ago, if someone had said to you, you would be a stick, you'd be an initiated medicine woman in the lineage of the Dagara people, you would have just not believed that person. And it's a message that I see with my clients. It's a message that comes through to me so often is stay open with your medicine, stay open, because there's so many parts of yourself that are still being revealed to you. And to those listening, I cannot urge you enough to go and find the book of Water and Spirit by Malidome Some. Read that book, because when you read that book, you begin to understand the depth of the magic that exists in Africa, the depth of the traditions here. And, as someone, I've studied Hermetic alchemy, I've studied a lot of ceremonial magic, I've done the psychedelics. I'm a seeker and I'm hungry for gnosis. So I really have gone into a lot of different traditions. I have Celtic roots, and like I've looked at it all, and nothing has quite prepared me in understanding the depth of mysticism and magic that sits in Africa. And that's probably no surprise when we look at how she has been colonized and how she has been abused, because of the magic that sits here. So, Kat, I know a little bit more about your story than some of our listeners, just in terms of how you were accepted into this lineage. And I would love for you to share that, because, when we are walking the path of self initiation, there is that fine line. And this is really what I'm hoping to uncover in these conversations, with where we carry ourselves with that personal commitment and where we get initiated by something that is much older than us, that that validates that initiation.
I love that question. Yeah, I think this is so relevant to so many people, because so many of the people I sit with, they're like seeking that. They're hungry for that. There's something in their soul calling them. And that's because lineage in the traditional old ways gives us so much. It gives us these organizing structures of coherence, is how I've come to think of it, to make sense of so many streams of deeply intuitive, earth-based information and what to do with it. And, it's a very subtle form of communication that humans all over the world have always had access to. So, okay, so I'll share a little bit about, I think this is so important, because there is a difference, right? In there's many ways we can come into a lineage. And for broad strokes, I'd say there's two groups. There's open lineages and closed lineages. Open lineages, a good one is yoga, right? Anywhere, people all over the world study yoga. If you're interested in taking your practice further, you take a yoga teacher training, maybe you end up teaching it, and so on. And even though there's, certifying bodies or what have you, there's no gatekeepers. There's no one saying you can or cannot do this if you feel called. And that is such a powerful access point. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason that these people created that openness. On the other hand, there's many closed lineages, which essentially mean many things, right? Either you are not allowed to join unless you are of native ancestry or blood or related to this tribe somehow. That's one level. Another is that you can join, but you must have been invited by someone who is already within the lineage. You must have apprenticed or worked with them. And then in the case of the Dagara, which I love this medicine so much, because it is so like African in its nature. And when I feel into the energetics of African medicine, there's some really like powerful, like deep vibrations, right? It is the umbilical cord of the planet. It is the motherland. But there's also playfulness. There's also this trickster energy, this kind of like, right? And many other cultures share that too. But it has its own flavor of the joke. And so when you work with so the Dagara lineage is a closed practice. And how it works in this tradition is that anyone can experience the medicine. And because the diviners, they are working with and channeling the beings of this lineage as well. So I'll explain a little bit about those. Those are the wild ones we call the Wedame, and the water beings, which are the Contomble. And then, of course, our ancestors, as well as the consciousness of nature, the consciousness of the mountain, the consciousness of the earth. And there's some other beings in there too, but that's kind of the main cosmology. And so what happens in a divination is that you are given messages and rituals from these beings who are working through a diviner who's channeling them. So, when I give offerings or rituals to people, it is not me giving them. It is what I am receiving and passing forward. So what ends up happening is that many of us who are on certain paths or carry certain kinds of medicine are recognized by these beings. And, okay, so there's ways of getting prepared, and it won't be an obvious, you're on the path of initiation. It will be something like, oh, you need to make these shrines. You need to have your grandmother's shrine. You need to have, this shrine to essentially prepare the energetic foundation to hold more power and to have the relationships that will sustain you as you do this work, because it is never just you.
Yeah.
So right away, when I started working with my teacher, and I was ripe, there was something, there was a door opening in me that was ready, and I was seeking. And right away, in the first divination I ever had with my teacher, I was given the rituals to create 2 very essential shrines for my ancestors. And throughout the about year-long period where I was just purely working with this medicine, before there was any whisper of initiation, there was significant preparatory experiences that I was given. One of my favorite and most terrifying was going out to sleep in the woods. And I lived in the middle of the woods in Northern California. Go out and sleep in the woods alone without any protection. Because I needed to encounter the fear of the dark that was holding me back. So there's several, each person has their own unique ways of getting ready. But when you get to a certain level where the beings are like, okay, your capacity is now increased, you have the readiness in terms of energetic and spiritual development. Basically, they will speak it through a divination with your teacher. And so my teacher, it was right around solstice of 2020. And, he basically was like, girl, are you ready? It's time. The beings are inviting you to step in. And the beauty of this, once you are invited, is that tradition dictates that you go receive another, what's called a blind confirmation from a diviner who is of your same gender, regardless of your teacher's gender, in the same lineage, has never worked with you, has no idea that you have been working on this medicine. And it's so beautiful because there's this almost, you have to go into this blind confirmation div pretending like you're a total newbie.
Yeah.
So there's this trickster element of like deception for the purpose of revealing the truth. And what that does is it removes the human bias. So even if my teacher is like, Kat is so great, love her, want her in this lineage, that other person is the one who confirms it, because that shows that it is the beings who are asking for this, not the humans.
Yeah.
So that's how the initiatory protocol in this lineage works. And then, you go get initiated, which is essentially you are merging with beings. You are coming into a shared consciousness or a shared consciousness stream. So, I like to say I'm wedded to the wild ones. Like that is literally partners that I have committed, taken a vow to walk with. And as my teacher reminded me, he was like, once you say yes, you open the door to something that even if you step out of this lineage, you can't ever fully shut.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is a profound like promise that I take very seriously.
Mm. I feel quite emotional listening to this. I feel like I want to cry in respect and with the beauty of this marriage to the wild ones. And that probably just comes from a deep love for the wild ones, because I love I love all that is wild and true. So, Kat, what I love so much about your story, there's two aspects that I really love. The one is around gatekeeping and the respect for that. Even if it's going into nature and making an offering, having the discipline to actually sit and wait and see if there is a sign that our offering has been accepted. The respect that there are gatekeepers and guardians for all facet of magic, and cultivating that in one's practice. Always watching out for, I've made this offering, I've done this prayer, I've done this ritual. What is the response? Has this been accepted or not? And learning from that. And I think for anyone listening, if you're new to this, it's such an important step in developing that dialogue with the natural world, understanding that there are gatekeepers to everything. So from that aspect, I really love the story. And the second aspect is that the importance of respecting the foundational boundaries of a lineage. Because if, for instance, this tradition is carried over into the West, and you have a teacher that just loves you and thinks you're amazing, and doesn't want to risk losing you by sending you in for the blind test, and you don't do it, and then you don't initiate someone further, there is so much that then gets lost in this tradition. And there will be examples of that all over. And so that, the first time I heard you sharing your story on What's the Juice podcast, which is actually how I found you, that was such I was so led to you because it was just so random that I was listening to that at that moment. But that really captivated me about the story because, again, as someone who really respects something that is true and unchanged, down the line, I was like, that's amazing that this is being honored and that has worked for you. And I'm sure that it's been not only important for the lineage, but it's also been important in holding you through your trials and initiations since then, because we all have self-doubt, especially you as a Western woman. I mean, there must be many moments where you think to yourself, have I gone crazy? I walked off the path. And then you remember, but Kat, there was that double blind test, girl. I mean, there've probably been so many things, but I'm sure that's been so supportive for you in your journey as well.
Mhm. Oh yeah. And it brings up one of my favorite subjects and topics, which is the development of energetic power.
Mm,
And at the heart of all healing is, how do you essentially like cultivate and contain your power in a way that is healthy, productive, right? Like, because that's at the root of all healing. And
mm,
I find that we are often, when people talk about receiving tests around like manifestation or
mm,
whatever,
mm,
I, for me, that's like, well, that's in anything. It is when we want something, we have to be ready to hold it.
mm,
And I encounter this often in so many ways, right? It's like, because we don't often consider all the little, like what leads up, what feeds into that, what steps are involved. And then also,
mm,
what are the consequences? What does that bring
mm,
up in us? And one of the things that really happened for me on my journey was, um, you know, I was very self-conscious about being a woman of well, a white woman, right? A woman of
mm.
Indo-European ancestry who is now carrying a traditionally in like Black indigenous medicine. Like, what gives me
Yeah,
that
sure.
right?
Mm,
And I really tangled with that for a minute, which good. I needed to.
mm,
Um,
mm,
I had to ask myself some really difficult questions. And
mm,
ultimately, the whole experience of being on this What's the Juice podcast with Olivia she has an audience of 500,000 people. And it was such a profound initiatory experience to do that, have that go live. And I often, right, reflect to people as like, we all want the good, juicy parts of our power. We want to feel loved and adored and affect change and be sought out. And that's only one side of this experience. You have to hold both. And for me, the other side of like this huge influx of attention and, you know, my medicine work reaching an immense amount of people was that there was a lot of pushback. There was some very like just horrible commentary on, you know, exactly what I was most worried about, you know, people being like, who is this white girl? You know, criticizing my appearance, going through my my profile and being like, she looks demonic, she is demonic. People who have never experienced my medicine making all of these assumptions based on something that has been historically persecuted and oppressed by the dominant religious institutions. So, on the one hand, it was hilarious and fascinating and sad to witness this meta drama that has, you know, replicated itself across history playing out again. But it really was a moment for me to reckon with both sides. And that is power. You are going to alienate people as much as you attract them.
Yeah.
And again, so people in the West, we're like, let's do mushrooms. Like, this is great. Plant medicine heals everything. But if you aren't ready to look at the fact that you might be engaging with spirits or energetics that you have no relationship with, that you are opening up portals in people's psyches in reality, right? And that attracts energies. These are all things that, again, if you don't have the capacity to confront, to hold, to love, you are going to tip over really quickly. And it's going to have some serious consequences, which will be very painful and potentially destructive.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an important conversation for us to have.
Yeah, I mean, what an initiation into do I trust and believe in myself? What an initiation into that authentic holding of the energy. What threshold to cross in terms of, if I hold more power, have I been prepared to hold it even in isolation, even in ridicule? Do I deserve this power? And I love that you brought up the example of the psychedelic work, because in listening to you, I was thinking of, I've done a lot of work with the mushrooms. And when I track my journeys, I was noticing this recurring theme that I would, in retrospect, see myself going through the layers of the tree of life and the different sephirot on the tree. And it was only when I had moved up to Tiferet, so I had passed the initiations of the other sephirot. So, you know, it's the initiation of the mind, it's the initiation of the body, it's, you know, moving through the Maya, the illusion, that then the bliss of the journey would start to come. And I recognized that the deeper my walk into the underworld, the more ecstatic my journey would then end up being. And it was such an important self-initiation, because I was self-initiating, you know, with all this intense work with the mushrooms over many years, in this power dynamics, because I have only, and I do only work with the mushrooms by myself in the wild, and it is wild where I live. You know, we have predators, we have big cats, you know, it's and that's where I do the mushroom work. So, you know, and I'm sitting by myself, no one's holding space for me. And so, you know, when you were talking about the energetics of power, that was my work with the mushrooms really shaped an embodied understanding of that. And I remember hearing it when I was younger, and I don't know why it stuck with me so much, but I heard an elder say that for those who have the potential to become well known, or to carry fame in your life, you better be careful, because the degree to which you rise is the degree to which you fall. So being comfortable with one's shadow becomes absolutely essential because of exactly the example from which you've spoken.
Mm-hmm. I love that you brought in the world tree so much. And what a powerful archetypal living image that to me represents that exact, the duality, the balancing act. What we need, right? In order to, trees are balanced, their arbor, right? The reach of their branches is always balanced by the reach and like of the roots. And I notice this a lot in the West, this love and light mentality, which I find so irritating and irksome, because the truth is, it is your willingness to confront, to enter, and to welcome the darkness, to taste it, to touch it, to get to know it, that is your entrance into the bliss, into the feeling of lightness. And you don't get one without the other. So I see a lot of this love and light, which to me is, it is a form of like white supremacy, right? And maybe that's harsh, but this idea that you just get to extract the benefits from something without the recognition of the work involved and the willingness to do the deep integration of your shadow. And then what we have happen is, right, like I wrote something about this whole experience on Organic Olivia, which was the airing out of my witch wound, right? And there had been this part of me that has always felt monstrous. I noticed that people either they're really drawn towards me or they are freaked out by me. And it wasn't really until that experience and some deep underworld exploration that I really came to the realization that I am an underworld guide. I have descended into the realms of the soul, which is the soul is in the dark. The soul is in the mystery, right? In the four directions, the soul is in the west, which is home of the bear, the cave. We have to go into that dark place. And it is the fact that I have been to those dark places, both within myself and alongside others, that I think creates such a magnetized energetic within me that those who are not willing to do that will find me somewhat monstrous, because it's just, like I can't avoid it. I don't want to avoid it. But I will say that has made all my scary parts that used to run me and rule me, it has made them so much less fearsome, because I know what they are. I know how they express. I know, right? Like, and so that's now medicine for me. It's not harming anyone else. It's become a gift. But I couldn't have accessed that gift without the willingness to descend.
Kat, how can power not be polarizing? I mean, how can it not? And again, it, brings us back to, what I shared right at the beginning of our call. I mean, our thirst for spirituality it's just a thirst for authenticity. Know thyself. That's the name of the game. It's what we're actually seeking. The magic, the divinity, all of that we want to satiate ourselves in the love and light is actually just to know ourselves. And I did share this in the previous podcast with Vanessa, but I just have to say it again. The very first transmission I had with the goddess, and let me tell you, okay, so just backtracking a bit, I was in a mystery school for many years that was so brilliant in creating a container for me to experience ceremonial magic. And, there was so much development that happened within that container, but there was a very polarizing understanding of light and evil. And I became a leader in that school in the area that I was working in very quickly. And obviously, for some, that responsibility might feel fantastic, but as a person who takes responsibility very seriously, I was basically setting myself up for the most massive initiation, which was one day I was told by myself that I needed to leave. After like initiating everyone that I knew into the school, I needed to now leave. And coming from a tradition where there was such a strong rhetoric around evil, obviously the community that had become my family, I was viewed as evil. Evil had overcome me, and that's why I had left the school. Not because I followed my heart, which is what I was doing, but because I had succumbed to evil. And so it was after that experience of the mystery school that I started diving in through self-initiation. I stopped using the mushrooms recreationally, and I was really using them as a portal to that self-initiation. And the reason why I tell you this is that the first time I had this full body transmission from the goddess, I wasn't too sure if I was experiencing light or darkness, because I had never experienced anything. So energy that was so rooted and so dense. It was absolutely terrifying. And it was so difficult to hold, right? Because of the vibration was so high, and it did not feel like love and light. It did not feel like love and light. And the first message, the first thing that she had to sit down and say to me, okay, girl, like, you want to do this, you want to walk this path, you want to work with me, we've got to like get out of this dual thinking, because I created it all, right? I created it all. And the more like my path is open since then, it speaks to this idea that we run from our shadow, right? Or we do the work to try and banish the shadow. We run from any sense of wholeness. The mother, that like origin isn't just half, it isn't just the yin, or it isn't just the yang. It's all of it. It's everything. And we find our wholeness by holding everything, knowing thyself, the deepest love and compassion for the shadow, the darkness. And, how does the world heal without that? So, again, full power, how can it not be polarizing? And kudos to you. It's something that I'm still learning to be, is being okay with being so polarizing. But, looping back to that mystery school, I received so much initiation in that school, right? But the irony was, and I love how spirit works like this, the irony was that the greatest initiation in knowing myself was actually leaving the school, even though I had received so much profound initiation in the school.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Like, I had chills listening, and that occurred to me as you were speaking. I was, the initiatory experience of Severance. And when we vision quest, right? Like, I'm so fascinated by rite of passage work, because what it does is it actually grows us up spiritually. And without these initiatory rites, we are actually stuck. Like, we might do all of the adult things that, our culture says is what you do. But, based on our actual spiritual psychosomatic development, we are adolescents. And as someone who has often been an outlier or an outsider in many spaces, I know the deep pain of feeling that lack of belonging, or feeling cast out or rejected. But I also know that severance is essential to going out and finding the true self. We have to disidentify, or I don't even know if that's a word, but right, we have to separate ourselves from the collective identity in order to access our deep, true identity. And unfortunately, for many of us who are terrified of being isolated or cast out from the herd, it is very difficult to know ourselves at the level that we are here to know ourselves, because of that like need to belong, because of that need to be recognized or to have a role. And so I just want to honor and acknowledge you for undergoing a deeply painful rite that I know has gifted you so much more than the loss.
Mm. Thank you, sister. And while you speak, I think it's just worth saying that because there is so much manipulation of the light in this reality
Mm.
that we are navigating, one can see the merit, to carry that any degree of power, there has to be that initiation of severance. Because if we are not willing to be disliked for truth, if we're not willing to be rejected and isolated for truth, we would be very dangerous carriers of any kind of power because of the degree of manipulation that exists in the planet.
Well said. Mm-hmm. I also, just to circle back to what you were saying about, why is power so polarizing? And you were speaking to the experience of the goddess and the like the wholeness of her transmission.
Mm-hmm.
And I so love that, and I'm so glad that you brought that into the space, because the experiences that I have had of the divine, right, whether it's God or the angels or the goddess, have been exactly that. They have been so penetrating, and the word, I can't even use the word ecstatic. It is beyond that. They have been almost terrifying in the level of power that they have brought to me and through me. And, so like that has gifted me a much wider understanding of like the true power and nature of love will demolish the falsehoods. It will incinerate that which is untrue within us, which most of us have a lot of untruths and falsehoods, right? And fake identities that are armoring us. And guess what? God, the divine, the goddess, it is going to have to get through that, which is going to feel like a kind of death before it opens you up to enlightenment or awakening or consciousness expansion.
Yeah. I mean, can we, not imagine like ascension, enlightenment is absolute. It's not one half of the whole. It's absolute. And to follow the premise that we are all one, and yet to disengage and deny the shadow, it just, like, the basic maths just doesn't work. It doesn't work, Um, so yeah, it's a huge narrative that, I mean, I'm sure you agree. I'm seeing more and more narrative and understanding around the beauty and the importance of our shadow in our work and in knowing ourselves. And yes, there is unfortunately so much distortion in the new age love and light rhetoric. The truth is, it's so limiting. If we're only willing to see one part of ourselves, we lose out on so much of the magic too, because yeah, the gifts they come from the mud. I know that, like, the really cool parts of me have come from the shittiest experiences. The parts of me that make me a good friend, a good lover, a good mother, have come from being rejected, have come from making mistakes, have come from rejecting and denying myself first. Without that shadow, without that mud, I'd be a limp biscuit.
It's exactly like at the beginning, when you were introducing me, you were talking about my authenticity. And it is one of the things that people, I think, are drawn to me for. And, I often say to my friends, if you had only known me as a kid, like, you would not recognize the person in front of you, because I was so painfully shy. I was so, I'm like a triple Pisces. So I was so deeply in my inner world that I felt like I couldn't interface with the rest of it. And I remember there being this turning point when I entered high school where I was like, girl, you gotta like save yourself. Like you gotta give yourself a life raft to belong, to reach across this abyss that feels so immense. And I've had to extend that hand to myself so many times. And, you know, a big core story of my life is that I've experienced a lot of very painful gaslighting, manipulation, betrayal, some of it malicious, some of it really well intended by people I loved who were just trying to protect me. And so I've had this like 20-year long story, many stories kind of woven into that, but I had many experiences that created a story that was essentially a false reality. And I bring that up because it really was one of the deepest, some of the deepest soul work I've ever done to have to finally say the reality that I live in, the reality that I understand, that so many people deny or reject is equally as valid as the mainstream default reality that many other people subscribe to. And that is a really difficult thing to do when you grow up in frickin' Wisconsin to claim yourself as someone who is deeply mystical, shamanic, even if I didn't have those words, but have, oh, like I call myself a transcendent beast because I have felt like an animal for most of my life and had to put on this like human suit and learn how to navigate. So all of what people experience now as like, oh, you're a great communicator and I feel so safe with you, it's because I had to be safe with myself. And I had to learn how to trust myself when everything around me said that is the wrong thing to do. So I really do think it is how we, whether or not that's like a trauma response or a survival skill, I say this all the time in my work to people, like the thing that you think is the most painful wound, the most debilitating trauma, the most excruciating pattern that you can't seem to resolve has the most powerful gift for you, because the depth of that pain means you, when you get to the other side of it, are going to be a doorway for someone else who has not come through the other side yet.
Yeah.
And it will give you
Yeah.
skills that you can't find in a book.
Not that we want armor, but I see these experiences as giving us armor. You know, it's like these scars, they 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 prepare us for holding the power that really wants to find us. And it can't find us until we're ready to hold it, you know, as we've been discussing. And that's why this idea of the shield or the armor, once I've experienced that kind of pain and not broken, once I've gone through that and not given up on myself, once I've been humbled by that, so I'm aware of that ego trap, we become more and more ready to hold our medicine, to hold our gifts. And so, you know, when one hears this expression that our gifts sit in our shadow, that's a big part of why our gifts sit in our shadow, because we are only able to hold our gifts once we have alchemized that shadow. And listening to you speak, Kat, and it actually sounds like we have quite similar natal charts. I just want to share this because it actually leads quite nicely into the next question I want to ask. I've had astrologists, when they look at my chart, say to me, oh, you know, if you were born in India, you would have been sent to an ashram immediately. You would have been separated from your family and, you know, you would be in a temple meditating. Like it's all over your chart. And instead, like I've had a very busy life. Like I was in an Anglo-Saxon all-girls boarding school. You know, I've been divorced. I've like got a special needs child. Like I'm in it. Like I'm in this life. Like my life is as far from an ashram as you can imagine. And in my moments of like weakness and confusion, you know, when I'm in process, I often think like, why? Like, why did I choose to have the makeup of someone who wants to sit in a cave and just meditate, like such a deep thirst for mysticism when I'm like so deep in it, you know? And the key word is alchemy. I really believe it's alchemy. And I think it's got a lot to do with these times. And when I heard you sharing another origin story, because it really is an origin story of that painfully shy child who's still got the inner maturity to alchemize herself, to understand that no one's going to give her that hand across the bridge. She needs to create that bridge herself and stick her hand out. What I kept hearing was alchemy. And this is why we're in this life, like we're not in the ashram. We are paving paths, and there are millions of us doing it. We are paving paths to the light, like in the muck, and it's beautiful. And I feel like it leads me on to my next question, because it's something that I will be asking everyone, but I would love to understand or just hear your perception on how you are viewing these times that we are in. And it's such an open-ended question, but I leave it to you, because these are remarkable times. And we were just saying before we went into the call, like the field is so busy, there are so many ways that this could go. So how do you perceive what's playing out on the planet right now, Kat?
Mm-hmm. I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I'll never forget when I went to an Akashic reader for the first time, and she shared with me, she's like, your soul loves incarnating in kind of intense timelines. And I was like, yeah, that tracks.
Yeah.
And to me, this time, it feels like a time of spiritual warriorship. And, like thinking about what is a spiritual warrior, and like this whole idea of armor, and I've been really kind of reframing armor, because yes, there is armor, right? But the best defense is a good offense. So what that to me is fortification and a bringing forth of a level of truth that is inherently clarifying. Truth will always clear the way, and it is a vibration that like, I'm not saying I'm the arbitrator of truth, but I've gotten pretty good at feeling the vibration of truth. And so I think that this time is really about we see so much division, and like it's like all the turtles getting in their shells, and that's not what's going to save us. But it is asking of us a level of integrity and lived experience that is in alignment with truth, that is not, I talk about truth a lot, and we talk about it in our writing group, which is the real truth contains all sides. The real truth will always contain its opposite, and there's room for it, because the real truth will find itself in a place where it isn't wrong or right. It isn't black or white. It somehow allows for all to be present and participate in that truth. And I think that is such an important thing to remember, because we find ourselves in digging these trenches, which is not healing, right? And as someone who carries a lot of righteousness, I have been taught many, many things around that is not, it's easy to feel right. Does it serve the greater goal? No. And this question brings up for me one of the most profound medicine experiences I've ever had. And I was on some mushrooms, and I was with a really good friend of mine. We always have these deep experiences. And at one point I was speaking something to him about the nature of some of the work that he was doing. And all of a sudden I was pierced by this. I mean, I didn't see it, but I felt it. And it felt like a ray of light. And it pierced my heart. And I started channeling what was coming through. And as I was channeling, I was also kind of being flown around the world and being shown so much suffering. And it was, it was like looking at like, they were showing me a lot of India, they were showing me a lot of Africa, and kind of like these different areas where we tend to see what I would call a lot of darkness being purged. And I was given this profound teaching about the nature of what they call kingship. And it was this whole idea around power and what does true power mean? And even the idea of a king, which is very triggering for some, right? It evokes imperialism, it evokes rule, it evokes, like someone up here and people down here. But they were like, you have it all wrong. True kingship is a level of power that, right, it is not a triangular pyramid of hierarchy. It is a level of spiritual warriorship that uses power to advocate, to heal, to welcome and create an experience of wholeness that can be enjoyed by all. And so that really flipped so many of my own internal ideas about what power means and how it looks. And I share that because one of the most interesting things that I was shown was a lot of the people that we ostracize and reject and, right, just cast out because, because they're drug lords, they're, doing black arms deals. They are, their suffering is just so immense that we can't bear to look at it, or their cruelty or their ugliness is so immense. But what these beings were speaking to me was that these people have actually taken on such immense karma to reveal the nature of our own collective darkness, that they are actually, they are Buddhas in a sense. It might not look like that on the outside, but those people who have taken on the karmic work of revealing the woundings of humanity are to be like honored. And so it was just like, I really come back to that, reminding myself that like, wow, it's really a painful time in our collective experience where a lot of pressurization is happening. But I will say that pressurization is a form of purification.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? If you think about something being squeezed, it's going to like, stuff is going to come out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I see that is like, we are in a purge. And as you know, in medicine, the purge, you don't want to interrupt that.
Yeah.
That means that we just stuff those things back down in us where they rot and fester and become monstrous. We need to purge. And we are purging in some really like profound and devastating and destructive ways. But I think that's also illuminating the extent of our disassociation, our lack of responsibility, right? Like the falling out of truth with who we are and what we are here to actually do. And so I think it is a really brutal wake-up call, and I welcome it. Like, doesn't mean I love it.
Yeah.
But I really am trying to see it for what it is.
Spoken by a true spiritual warrior. And, I mean, how do we heal what we cannot see? How do we heal it? We can't heal what we cannot see. I had an experience again with the goddess and the mushrooms where something very specific was being purged, and there was something I was holding onto that I didn't need to hold onto. And I don't know what that was. It might not even have been this lifetime. It might have been something ancestral. It doesn't matter. But there was such an embodied lesson of we cannot hide anything. Don't ever hide anything. When we hide something, we create the opportunity for evil. We create the opportunity for distortion, for incongruency. Never hide anything.
Mhm.
Keep everything out in the
Mm.
open, keep everything transparent. Of course, it speaks to this divine desire for authenticity, by not
Mhm.
hiding anything because of the distortion it creates. But yeah, going back to what you said, how do we heal what we cannot see? And I really feel into that. It's something that I'm shown so often too, that this is the time of spiritual warriorship. This is the time of spiritual resilience. And it's not our bunkers that are going to keep us safe, because the chaos is not only on the physical. There is chaos happening on the emotional and the spiritual. The purging isn't only happening on the physical. And I think this is what is not getting through to the collective, that yes, we are aware of the imminent earth changes, of the potential for catastrophic earth shifts. But just as the earth is correcting herself, so is there an attempt on our emotional, mental, and spiritual fields for the same to be happening. There is stuff being purged there too. This is a time where we can't run from our shadow. We can no longer deny our shadow. And the resilience, the fortitude, the survival of this time is going to come from that spiritual warriorship. Can we stand true and look at all of ourselves and be willing to heal all of ourselves rather than running from ourselves? Can we move forward? So beautifully expressed. Thank you, Kat. I really feel that. Really feel it in my bones. Yeah, about this purging and the spiritual warriorship that is required now to move the earth and our potential on her to the next
Mhm.
level.
Mm. Thank you, Robyn. Yeah, I just want to underline that, like, you can't run from yourself.
Mm,
And that's at the core is what I feel happening is like, stop running, face it,
mm,
look at it, sit with
mm,
it,
mm,
and come into a
mm.
different relationship with it.
Yeah, yeah. So powerful. And that's the alchemy. And
Mm-hmm.
enough of us spiritual warriors do that work. And the path is no longer a path, it's a ravine, and it's the only way that we go through the mountain. So I pray and I
Mm.
trust. Thank you, sister. This has been so divine.
Mm. Thank you so much, Robyn. It is like, thank you for the opportunity to share and to be seen. And I have enjoyed this conversation so thoroughly. And if I may offer one last thing that just like bubbled up. So I've been learning about water. And, um, I will acknowledge that even as someone who works with the elemental realm, I took water for granted. It is a
Mm,
supreme consciousness, it is a living
mm,
liquid crystal. And one of the things I've also been learning is about purity and purification processes of
mm,
metal.
mm.
And so, one of the things that I started doing after learning about water was drinking structured water,
Yeah.
which, introduces coherence that has been like jumbled because of the ways that we
Mm,
process and treat our municipal water source.
mm,
So, structured water is really fascinating because what it does is it reintroduces, in the same way that a crystal holds a pattern of coherence, which is what makes it powerful, water
yeah.
holds that pattern of coherence. And when we introduce a substance of coherence, we're actually introducing a purity back
Yeah.
into an incoherent environment. And so for anyone who's like, wow, I feel so overwhelmed by the world and I feel like I'm not doing enough. We're not supposed to do everything. We are supposed to tend our little plot. And so this whole excavation and exploration around water has really reminded me, because if you were to take like a glass of water that is structured and add it back to a watershed or the ocean, it would start restructuring anything that was incoherent.
Mm,
And I just want to bring that forward because that to me feels
mm,
like our work
mm.
right now is, can you
Yeah.
be in such deep coherence with yourself, with your truth, with like what you came here to do, that
Mm,
whatever incoherence you could like interact with, you start to help it find its coherence.
mm. Yeah. Thank you. I needed to hear that. I'm sure everyone listening needed to hear
Mhm.
that. Oh, yeah. Thank you, sister. Yeah, that is just so beautiful and so humbling to hear. I've always experienced that it's humility that opens the gates. The more we humble ourselves, the more the gates open, the more we step out of our superiority and self-righteousness and
Hmm.
entitlement. And so, I mean, that is just such a magnificent image and archetype of service that you've shared with us. So thank you from my heart. That was beautiful.
Mm, good. I was like, oh, this feels really important to share. And
Yeah.
may that little, may that do its work in the world and find who it's meant to
Mm,
find.
mm. Thank you. Thank you, Kat.